Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video. Today's video is a little bit fun. So I'm using some products from W+9. I'm using the poinsettia bouquet set. I pulled out the Be Merry, didn't end up using it. I pulled out the Joyful poinsettia and didn't end up using it. Also these wood planks and the hexagon dies. So why is this video so fun? Because Dawn, who is the owner of W+9 and one of my best friends, and I decided, we were on the phone the one day and we were just chit-chatting. And we were like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to do like a collaboration video where we both use the same set? Because we have very different styles. And she, like I do mostly Copic, she does mostly watercolor, though she's amazing with Copic. She's amazing with everything, let's be real. And so we thought it would just kind of be fun for me to use it with Copics and her to use it with watercolor. And so now here we are today, and I can't wait to see what she made. So one of the other things that we're talking about, and you may have seen from the title of the video, is that we're talking about clean and layered cards and the rule of thirds. And that is much later in the video because I have to make all of the elements before I can talk about the elements. So if that is what you are here for, you're going to want to jump ahead. I think like the 18-minute mark, to be honest. It's a long one, but my videos are always long. Let's be real. So this wood planks stamp set has one that's smaller boards and this one that's a little bit larger. I love this set. Like, love it. It's good for so many things. So I'm using it here with this wet cement color from Hero Arts, which is a warmer gray. And it probably looks a little bit brown on the screen, but it is a warmer gray. But so I'm using that to create my background. Clean and layered cards. They can be tricky because you want it to be a very clean look, a very like classy, clean look, but at the same time have a little bit more interest and maybe some more elements. And so a really good way to do that is to have a good neutral background. That's what I created with the wood planks. You can use pattern paper if you have it. And you can do it a couple of different ways. It doesn't even have to necessarily be a neutral color. That's just what I prefer because I do like that really kind of clean look. I'm stamping it's more like a swag style. There is a bouquet in this set as well. I have used that. I'm not even sure which one Dawn is using, which element. But I have used the bouquet in the past and I will link that to the video at the end if you would like to see that. And that I think was from last Christmas. But anywho, I'm stamping this in Hero Arts Intense Black ink. It is safe for Copic markers because as I already stated, that is what I'm going to be using today. I have to be honest with you guys, I'm totally living on the edge today. I'm doing this voiceover with my door open and I am allowing the dogs inside. Now, Emma has chosen to lay in the hallway. Molly is in the room with me, but at any moment she could start barking at absolutely nothing because that's what my dogs do. So it's a risk, but she was sleeping and I didn't want to wake her. So here we are. So if you happen to hear some dogs barking and then the sound cut out for a second, it's because that's what happened. Risk you take as a dog owner. So here for these little pine cones, I went in with some warm grays because I wasn't really sure about my color palette, like how I was going to go. So I decided I would color them with these warm grays and just kind of leave them there shaded and then determine how I was going to, like what color I would add to them once I figured out the rest of the colors. For these poinsettias, or as somebody pointed out when they were watching one of my previous videos, poinsettias, however you would prefer to pronounce them, I am going to color them as if they were light-ish pink. But I'm going to do the most of the shading with my grays. If you want a white poinsettia, they're probably a little bit more cream colored. I'm going to be honest, you might want to use the warm grays. But I use the cool, and this is how you would color them white. You would just be adding the shadows. And so where the petals lay on top of each other, we'll have some shading, and where they meet each other, we will have some shading. Also, when you're shading your stamps, you want to look at the lines that the illustrator has put there. So like when Dawn was illustrating these, several of the petals have little shaded areas at the tips. And so, sorry, I kicked my garbage can. That was probably loud. Moving on. But they have shading at the tips and I also added shading there. So if there was a line, I added just a little bit of shading. And when you're coloring objects white, we have talked about this in the past, but you want to make sure you're leaving lots of white area. All we're doing is putting in the shadows. That's it, because the paper is white. So once I work out from my lightest to my darkest color, normally I would work back in from my darkest back into my lightest. This time, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to let them lay how they lay, and then I am going to bring in that pink. So my darkest color is this C5. You could go even darker than that if you wanted to get really good depth and dimension, but I was happy with a C1, C3, C5, and typically I am. If you watch my videos, very rarely do I get into like a C7. But yeah, so you might be asking yourself how I became friends with Dawn. Well, I'm going to tell you. So we have been friends for years, and like I was buying her products long before I ever met her in real life, because her style is gorgeous. She has a lot of beautiful florals. I was just always a very big fan, and I was actually introduced to W+9. Wait, we have to go back to the card. So this is the R20 that I chose. I'm going to go right over that shading that I already have there. I'm going to flick some color from the base of the petal and from the edge of the petal, and I'm going to leave the inside white. So my highlight is actually going to be the white of my paper, and I really like the way that these came out. It's a little bit different from your typical red or cream colored, poinsettia, but I really liked them, and it helped me kind of set the pace for the rest of the colors that I chose. And so you may notice that this card is a lot more muted for me. But I was channeling my inner Dawn because she likes a much more muted color palette. And so I was like, oh, she'll be so impressed with me because I made a muted card. And so I'm excited for her to see it. In fact, when I called her this morning, I was like, girl, you're going to be so proud of me. I made a muted card. But anywho, so one of my first design teams was a blog name hero. In fact, it was my very first. And that was quite a long time ago at this point, because I've been in the game for a hot minute now. But anyway, so we used to do different kind of collaborations with other companies. And so sometimes it would be like adhesive, and sometimes it would be felt, sometimes it would be embossing powder. But every once in a while, we would do another stamp company. And the one time we did W+9, I was like, these stamps are gorgeous. Like, they let us kind of go in and pick, I think it was like 1 or 2 sets we wanted to work with. And then I ended up shopping. And I thought that they were so super pretty, and I still do. That's why I still use them. And so that is how I ended up being introduced to her stamps. And then of course I was addicted. So I didn't meet her until, when was it? 2014, I think. I met her in real life at a craft retreat. And yeah, I think everybody has at least one friend that just like you met them and immediately you were like, we've known each other our whole lives. And that's pretty much how it was with Dawn and I. From like the second that we met, we were BFFs. And that really has not changed throughout the years. Like, even though we live in 2 completely different states, even though we only get to see each other maybe once or twice a year, I obviously haven't, because of the pandemic, I haven't seen her in like 3 years. But like when I needed a girls' trip to get away when I was going through my divorce, like that's where I went. I went to Dawn's with a couple of other girlfriends as well. And so I'm just like I'm so super grateful because even through like the rocky points and like when I was pregnant with Caitlin, I wasn't doing much socializing of anything. We were, smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. I was tired all the time. But then like the next time we got on the phone, it was like no time had passed. which I really think are the best kind of friendships, honestly. And that's how it is with my best friend from high school. Like, I could not talk to her for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then the moment that we get on the phone, it's like nothing has changed. There's no judgment. There's no penalty. There's no, why didn't you get back to me? Why didn't you text me to see how I was? Why didn't you whatever? Like, there's none of that, which I think is super important to have in a friend, because we're all in different places. So anywho, that is how she and I kind of became super fast friends. And then, like, now whenever we go to retreat or whatever, everybody pretty much knows, like, we room together, we hang out together, we're together all the time. We're together all the time, trying to just soak up as much time as possible. So here, okay, so now I chose the yellow greens, even though they're a little less muted, because that made the most sense for the mistletoe. I am taking some liberties with this green here, but I'm okay with it, because I just think that it matched the color palette I was trying to go with, and it's my card, and it doesn't always have to be super realistic, but I do really like the blue greens for this, just as with those pinks, and that kind of warm gray color. So, but everything is the same here. As far as adding the shading is still like from the base of the leaf out. If one leaf is laying on top of another, shading. If, there's any extra lines drawn in, I add shading there. But really, it's just darkest at the base and lightest at the tip. That's pretty much what I'm going with for almost all of my leaves. And I will show you a couple of different ones I'm sure that you noticed before that I didn't show you all of them. It's because I'm coloring them the exact same way. And as you can see, my video is still, I was going to say terribly long, but average for me, really. And you had already seen it, and so I didn't want you to have to watch every single leaf be colored in the same exact manner. I changed nothing. Everything was the same. For the berries, I went back and forth about how to color them, and ultimately I did end up going with some red. I colored the mistletoe berries white, and I used those same warm grays that I used for the pine cone with the same principles we used for the flowers. I only added just the shadows, so my highlight is still just my white paper. I'm just going to go in and add those, and this is just because I think that images are more interesting when they have different color elements, but also it makes it just a little bit more dynamic to look at, and it's not boring. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't want your image to be boring. So for these berries, I actually use these 4 colors 2 different ways. So I colored some berries with an R32, an R35, and an R29. And I colored some with an R35, an R29, and an R59. And again, that's just creating kind of that variation of color. I didn't want them all to be super dark because, again, I have a more muted color palette, and I knew I was kind of taking a risk with the red. But I figured the berries were small enough that it wouldn't be too kind of in your face. You know what I'm saying? I didn't want it to be all like this one color just smacking you in the face. So for the rule of thirds, which we're going to get to here in just a little bit, I'm also going to do just a smidge of color glazing for those pine cones. That's why I shaded them with the grays. I could have shaded them with browns, but once I saw the color palette I had going on, I knew I wanted just a kind of like a mid-tone warmer brown, and so I went with an E23. It's like right in the middle. It's not super warm, but it's not super desaturated either. And it worked really well with the warm grays I had on. So I just went right over the pine cones with this, and they maintained their shading from the gray, and I was happy with them. So now that the coloring is done, I am going to cut this out with its companion die, and then we will start talking about the design. So the rule of thirds is if you break up your paper into 3 equal columns and 3 equal rows, where they intersect is where in design is the ideal place to put your focal points. So here, for the clean and layered portion, I knew I needed something that you would be able to rest your eye on. And that is how I chose the hexagon. I could have used the large Be Merry sentiment, but I felt like I had this large focal point and the Be Merry sentiment wasn't going to make sense with that. So I decided that I was just going to do this large hexagon to give the eye somewhere to rest. But then I thought, well, that might be kind of boring. So in order to make that area just a little bit more interesting, I decided to do a frame of color. So the inside will still be white, will still be that kind of rest area, but the outside is going to be a colored frame. And that's going to give me some continuity and kind of bring everything together into the center, even though we are also using that rule of thirds. So here you can see the sentiments are just too large. It doesn't make any sense. And with this swag piece here, like if I use the banner at the bottom, I have this big open area on the right. My design is not balanced. So that's not going to work. Whereas if you use one of these smaller sentiments and put it in that area where one of our thirds would be, I'm going to show you on a actual paper here shortly, that it balances the design. And while it may not have perfect symmetry, there is a balance between your focal point and your sentiment. So here I'm just trying to figure out exactly how I'm going to put my flower down. This works both ways. So if you don't want to put the sentiment in the bottom third, you can put it in the top third. So here, I drew it in pencil and then I realized you might not be able to see it. So I went back over it with pen. Here is where they intersect. These kind of 4 points on our card. So putting our focal point on one and our sentiment on another is almost automatically going to give us a good balance. So here would be the flower on the bottom right third, and then, or you can do a center. That's what I was showing you with the bouquet. Doing a center will also work. But no matter where you put your focal point or your sentiment, as long as you're putting it on one of these thirds, you should be pretty solid in your design. So here I am using the floral in the bottom right third, and I will put the sentiment in the top left third. And it's a good design. It's a good balance. Alternatively, you can flip it around. Put your focal point in the top and put your sentiment in the bottom. But again, we're still having this really good balance of our design. Here, if you try to put the sentiment in the center and then leave your focal point in the top, it's not balanced. If you try to put your sentiment on the same side as your focal point, we're not balanced. So they neither, in this case, they need to be kind of catty corner from each other because it's more of like a corner piece, this large floral swag, the way that it swirls up. But you can see that it's still in that bottom right third. And I'm actually going to, I didn't even end up using this one. I ended up using the Merry Christmas. But in order to fill that space, I can combine this larger sentiment with a sub-sentiment and fill up that space even more. Here, I just wanted to show you kind of some things that would be off balance. If you put your swag on top and you have a smaller sentiment that you put on bottom, we're not very balanced. This doesn't look very nice together. And then alternatively, if you move that sentiment where you're putting it in the center, so here, this goes into symmetry. Like you could put the pieces on each corner and the sentiment in the middle, and we have balance, we have symmetry. Symmetry is the easiest way to achieve balance in a card design, in any design really. So here, if they're facing each other, again, they're symmetrical, sentiment in the center, we have good balance, we have good symmetry. These are really easy ones that you can do in order to get a good design. with all of that said, I did the top and bottom as well. Rules are meant to be broken. This is not hard and fast, like that you have to do this every time. I don't believe in that. Like, I think inspired and beautiful pieces come from people who break the rules well. But if you're struggling with card design and you're like, I never know where to put my sentiments, this is maybe something that could help you in your placement. Because it's just a nice, easy, like once you make your grid, you can have that on hand, or in my head, I just know where that grid is, like on my card. I can visualize it. So here I used a hexagon and I cut out the largest hexagon out of white. Now I decided I was going to go with my frame out of red because it would kind of be like bold and pop off the page. And it would match those berries. So I have that continuity that we have talked about in previous card design videos. So I am going to just line these up and cut them out. And then pretty much almost immediately, when I put it on the card, I realized that this was not going to work. I do like the boldness of it, and I think if my poinsettia was red, it would have worked well. But my poinsettia is not red. So it just felt like it was competing with my focal point, and that's not going to work. So if you have your design elements lined up and there's an element that still isn't working, maybe check your color. That might be the fix that you need to make it work. Not that this is horribly ugly. It's not. It's just not as what I would like it to be. So I'm going to use this rose gold brushed metallic paper from Concord 9th. And this was like perfect. I wish I had rose gold embossing powder, and I should buy some, but I don't have any yet. There's a couple of people who have some on the market. But I cut the same frame out of this metallic rose gold color, and like there's such a difference between the feel of the card with the red versus with this rose gold color. It's not competing with my focal point. It's complementing it. And that's really what we're looking for. My focal point is still my front runner, still my showstopper, still the first thing you're looking at, and that's exactly what we want. So I have some Desert Storm from Nina cardstock here. I am treating it with my embossing powder, and then I'm going to stamp it in some embossing ink. Full disclosure and transparency, because I believe in that. After I did this, I totally adhered my sentiment on crooked, like really cattywampus. I don't know if I was rushing because I was trying to get to Nathan's basketball practice or what happened, but when I was taking my pictures, I was like, oh girl, what you do to this thing and why? So I did end up last night pulling it off while the glue was still wasn't fully adhered. And then this morning I just redid it because I couldn't pull it off without tearing the back of it, which was fine. I just redid it. And when I redid it, I stamped it in white pigment ink. Just trying to be honest about the final card versus what you're seeing here. I didn't feel the need to refilm it because you've seen me already do it, but I am acknowledging it. I made a mistake and I fixed it. So now we are to the assembly portion. And again, we're going to have this hexagon with this little rose gold frame in the center. I wanted to pop mine up because I like a little bit of dimension with my clean and layered cards. So I'm going to adhere them all as one piece. So I'm going to adhere everything that I can to this one hexagon and then add my foam tape to just the back of the hexagon and anything that hangs over. And that's just because it's easier than having to do all of the little tiny pieces parts. I could have put the hexagon down flat and then had to cut a bunch of little tiny foams for my flower, but that just didn't seem worth it when I could just pop it all up together. So I'm adhering them all flat to the hexagon, and then I will pop the whole thing up. So I'm super excited to see what Dawn made. And I have no idea. I didn't share mine with her either, to be honest. She doesn't know what I made, so I'll be curious to see what she has to say. I think that she'll, with her love of a muted color palette, where I have a love of a bright color palette, we might we might be, I think she might be a little bit surprised at what I made. So, anywho, I've covered this whole thing in foam, and then I am going to adhere it basically in the center. The design ends up being a little bit more toward the top, but the hexagon is centered, and that's the part that I think matters. And you can totally see here, looking at it, how crooked that sentiment is. I did use some pearls. These are the holiday pearl stickers from Honeybee, and they have this really pretty kind of blush pink color in them that matched my flowers really well. And I ended up in the final card also moving those because I didn't like where they were. I added some shimmers, and then I went in with my white gel pen and added some highlights to the berries and the centers of the flowers, and then I called it good. So if you're not familiar with W+9, I hope that you will head over to the store and check out their items. Head over, of course, and check out Dawn's video because she is just endlessly talented, and I have no doubt she will absolutely blow you away with what she's created. And thank you so much for joining me. I have a lot more videos coming up this weekend and into next week, so I'll be excited to share that stuff with you guys. And before I go, can we all just give Molly a big round of applause for not barking throughout that entire voiceover? I'm so proud of her. All right, thank you so much for your time. I'll catch you guys on the next video. Bye.